Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a real honor to be here. And also a challenge as well. This is a pretty group with pretty diverse interests, and I'm a primate behavioral ecologist. That's at least what I call myself. I'm going to frame the talk today in terms of human evolution, although it's cheating a little bit. I'm kind of masquerading as an anthropologist. I'm really, especially sitting with Nick Burton-Jones here, I feel like kind of a fraud talking about human evolution. But anyway, the bulk of my work has been on hunting and meat sharing among chimpanzees. So I'm going to talk about that today in the context of human evolution. Hello. That's okay. There we go. So I'm going to start with a quote or the title of a chapter from the Evolution of Human Diet. All right. It's a little extreme, okay? And this depiction, the kind of depiction that you see in every introductory biological anthropology textbook, is a little ridiculous, let's be honest. But I don't think you're going to find many people who will argue with you when you say that meat played a prominent role in human evolution. And in fact, it's seen by many people as one of the critical factors in the development of a lot of the peculiarities of our biomechanics and our behavior. Okay? So this includes our exceptionally large and complex brains, our bipedality and pair bonding, central place foraging, and many other traits that humans possess. So all modern human foraging societies eat meat, and in many cases, lots of it. So famous examples, we have the Inuit and Australian Aborigines, the Hadza, of course, and the Aceh. And across all these disparate societies, there are many similarities shared by all of them, but really at least two are seen in all of these societies. First is that humans collaborate, or it's often collaborative. Okay? So these are a few lovely pictures by Brian Wood, who studies the Hadza. And here, this hunting party, these men are all working together to hunt a zebra. And the thing to note here is that each hunter is taking on a specific role. And in fact, they're working in order for the group to succeed, not necessarily thinking about their own immediate self-interest. So critically, each hunter is trying to increase the chances that that group makes a kill. Now, hunting by most hunter-gatherers, in fact, doesn't occur in groups like that. That's relatively rare. More often, we see scenes like this with a single individual out hunting prey by himself. But this is also viewed as a collaborative behavior because meat is brought back to camp and shared with others. So in a sense, they're pursuing different prey, but they're working together, again, for the good of the group. So the second key feature that is shared by many or all human societies is that human hunting is almost always male biased. So again, nice pictures from Brian Wood here. Men travel specifically, but long distances, targeting ungulate prey, not searching for vegetative matter, while women tend to focus on tubers, for example, here, and other reliable plant matter. When they do hunt, they tend to target things like this tortoise here, or fledglings, anything that's relatively low cost. Okay, it doesn't involve a lot of time or energy to pursue. Okay, so this is a ubiquitous feature of human nature. So, collaboration and male-biased hunting seem to be at the core of our sexual division of labor, okay, which is a central feature of human society. So it allows us to pursue high-risk high yield prey while still buffering against failure. So you can go out and hunt and be sure of a meal when you come home. And it's really widely thought to be absolutely critical to our success as a species. So my question is, how did these features of collaboration and male-biased hunting arise? So are they, whoops, I'm going to skip this, forget that. Are they purely the result of our cultural norms surrounding sharing and provisioning? So purely human, or are there deeper biological roots to these behaviors? So that's the main question I'm going to address today. So in order to do that, we need to make inferences about the behavior of the last common ancestor of great apes and humans, which is a creature that lived approximately 5 to 7 million years ago. What had the last common ancestor behave in regard to these questions? And then that'll allow us to understand what's different about humans, what's similar about humans, and then how we got there. So obviously, as we're fond of saying, behavior doesn't fossilize, at least the kind of complex social behavior that we're talking about. So in order to reconstruct the behavior of an extinct creature, we turn to modern living primates. And in particular, chimpanzees and bonobos are our closest living relatives. And I'm going to shy away from saying we're treating them as models of the last common ancestor. That's a common thing for people to say. They're not, because we had 5 to 7 million years of evolution. So did they. So some things are bound to have changed. However, they do face many of the same social and ecological problems that humans do, and they are, in many ways, the best we have. So we use them as clues to try to understand the range of behaviors, the range of possibilities that our last common ancestor possessed. So we use them as clues, much as paleoanthropologists use fossils as clues. So I'm going to address, and chimpanzees in particular, because they hunt, are a particularly good species in which to ask this question. To get everybody on the same page, just in case, I know this is a very Capuchin-oriented department, so we have to change that. Talk about chimps, a little bit about their natural history, just so we're all on the same page. They live in large social groups, which we call communities. Typically, they're around 50 or 60 individuals, but they can be as big as 200. They have a fission-fusion social system, and this is something which, people who study chimpanzees just hate the fact that it's a fission-fusion social system because it makes it impossible to study them. So it means that in this group of 50 individuals, they're never all together at once. They're all often little subgroups, what we call parties, that have sort of changing composition over time, sometimes on the order of hours and days. So sometimes you can go for months without seeing certain individuals. Okay? They're never all together at once. The males depicted here are really pretty gregarious. They spend a lot of time grooming, like these guys. They form close pairwise social bonds and cooperate in forming coalitions and so on. By contrast, females are generally more solitary. This varies a lot from site to site, but at least at my research sites, females tend to be on their own with their dependent offspring, avoiding large groups. And they travel less than males do. They spend more time in sort of smaller areas of the range, mostly with their dependent offspring. They eat mainly ripe fruit, or they're ripe fruit specialists. And in order to get enough fruit, it means they have to travel over a pretty large range in order to get what they need. And fruit availability affects not only their travel patterns, but also party size. So when there's lots of fruit available, they're able to be in large parties together. And that will, as you'll see, will affect hunting patterns. Figs like these in particular are particularly important. They also eat leaves and flowers, like Wilkie here, and then also invertebrates many of which they fashion tools to extract, for example, termites from termite mounds. So unless you really weren't paying attention when I first started talking, they also, this should not come as any kind of a surprise, they also eat meat, right? It varies an awful lot from site to site. But so at my field site, for example, it's not particularly common. They eat meat, about 5% of their feeding time is spent eating meat. It's higher at other sites, lower at others. So it's about, Gombe seems to be about the mean there. Okay. So what kind of meat do they eat? Well, you can kind of divide it into two different types of meat or prey that they attempt to catch. The first are opportunistic prey. So these are cute little things that are running along the floor or hiding in crevices, and the chimps come upon as they're traveling from one fruit tree to the next. So we've got small duikers, super adorable bushbuck fawns that they're just hiding in the undergrowth. They will snatch baby baboons from their mothers, and then will also catch baby bush pigs as well. Chimps are horrible creatures. The other main category of prey that they go after are arboreal monkeys, and this at sites where they're available. Red colobus monkeys in particular are their most preferred prey. So whenever there's red colobus around or at a chimp site, they're the #1 prey item for chimps. They also will feed on red tails, black and white colobus, and blue monkeys as well. So I'm going to spend the next part of the talk talking specifically about red colobus monkeys, mainly because it happens often enough that we can actually collect really good data on it over the years, and also because they involve hunting in groups, which we will see in a moment. So males are about 12 kilos, so they're pretty big. Females about 8, and they live in large arboreal troops of 50 or so individuals. Okay, where's Erica? There you are. This is the time when this is video. I'm going to show some video of what a hunt looks like. She wanted to make, because I always do this at lunch talks. It's always a bit difficult, but it's impossible to describe what a chimpanzee hunt of red colobus is like. So I'm going to play you some of my video clips that I've spliced. I'm not pretending this is all one hunt. I've spliced them all together from my years in the field. Okay, so I'll try to describe it as we go along. Okay, so these are red colobus. Sorry, it's a bit shaky at the start. In the trees, chimps will come upon them in groups, and the males will get down below and be looking up into the canopy, looking for vulnerable individuals, and then they'll charge up into the canopy after them. Sometimes and the male colobus, like this guy, will defend themselves. And then you see acrobatics like that to catch them. There you go, Erica, close your eyes. When a monkey's caught, they usually bring it straight down to the ground. It's a bit of chaos. And then it settles down. Into these, you see begging clusters such as this, where you have a meat possessor in the middle with a monkey and several individuals nearby begging for portions of the meat. Okay, I guess that's all I put in. So I'm not going to talk about why they share meat today. I'm happy to do that afterwards. Had I known that Nick Burton-Jones was going to be here, I might have put more of that in, but I'm going to talk more today about how they catch the monkeys and why they hunt. Sorry, this seems to be a bit washed out, but chimpanzees live across equatorial Africa. My main research site is Gombe National Park, Tanzania, which is in the western part of Tanzania, right on Lake Tanganyika. And this, of course, is where Jane Goodall did her pioneering chimpanzee research, starting there in 1960, and I feel remarkably lucky because the work is continuing, essentially has continued continuously ever since from there, since then. So at Gombe, we've got 3 main chimpanzee communities. We have Matumba in the north, which numbers about 20 individuals, Kasakela in the center, which is about 55, and then Kalande, which we're still not entirely sure about, but is around 20 individuals. And these have changed a lot over the years, both in terms of the number of individuals and their range. But this is sort of the mean. So Jane started in 1960, and then in the early 70s, they started systematic daily focal follows of chimpanzees in the Kasakela community. And then they started this exact same protocol in Matumba in 2000. And so what happens is this. 2 Tanzanian field assistants go out into the forest every day, and they choose a focal individual to follow all day long, regardless of who that individual is hanging out with. And they collect various systematic data on check sheets, so party composition, what the focal animal is eating, where they are on a map, sexual state of females, and so on. Encounters with potential prey items, that's an important one. And then the second guy writes down longhand narrative notes of everything that happens, particularly to the focal individual, but then also more group level conspicuous events like hunting. So it's very broad, but it's really important to, it's also very, very deep, and this goes all the way back to the early 70s for Kasakela and 2000 for Matumba. So since 1997, I've been working with my PhD advisor, Ann Pusey, to basically digitize the mountain of data that have come out of this project. We're up now to about 500,000 sheets of paper. And so we've used an army of undergraduates and volunteers using specialized computer programs to digitize all these data and to build a relational database, which is essentially a series of very simple tables all linked by common fields, which makes it easier to determine, for example, which individuals were present in a party at a given time. We can just do it automatically, what the focal was eating on that day, etc. Super powerful. So I should say the main data are housed at Duke University right now, and Ann and I are co-directors of the database, which is shared between Duke and Arizona State. I also did some work at Kanyawara, the Kanyawara chimpanzee community in Kibale National Park, Uganda, which is a very, very similar site, started by Richard Wrangham in 1987. Same format. Ugandan field assistants collecting daily data on focal animals. So together with these 3 communities, I've got 72 years of data with which to examine hunting patterns in chimpanzees. Okay, so rarely can we say that something is ubiquitous. This always happens. Wherever chimpanzees hunt red colobus, the probability of a hunt occurring increases with chimpanzee party size. So upon encountering a group of colobus monkeys, the probability that a hunt occurs increases significantly with the number of male chimpanzees who are present. Right? They hunt in groups, ubiquitous.
How do you define a hunt?
Climbing up in pursuit of a monkey to the height, into the trees to the height of the lowest monkey. So anytime you see a group action like this, we run into the potential for what we call a collective action problem. So I think this picture of lions hunting illustrates the collective action problem really well. I think several lionesses bringing down a buffalo. I certainly know which individual I would rather be in this scenario of the lions, right? I'm this one, or even this one, right? If other individuals can do the work for you, and as you saw in the video, you can get meat afterwards, you should, from an evolutionary perspective, let others bear the costs, and you reap the benefits. of others' actions, which predicts that cooperation or group action like this shouldn't occur, yet it does. And so how do chimpanzees overcome this potential collective action problem? So first hypothesis is that together in groups, they are better able to collaborate. By collaborate, I mean, I'm going to use the Bosch and Bosch definition, complementary actions. So not doing the same thing, but actions that are complementary, related in time and space. So Christophe Bosch is a primatologist who works at Tai National Forest in Côte d'Ivoire. And he describes among his chimps specific roles, drivers and blockers and so on. It's basically saying that they're working together in order to increase the chances that the group succeeds, sometimes at the cost of their own individual success. So I've spent hours playing around with PowerPoint to do this. So ooh and ah at the right point. Here's our hypothetical monkey group and our hypothetical chimp group. This is what we mean by collaboration. You know, two guys go up there. Ooh. Two guys go to the side. Now the trap is set. And then one guy runs and drives the monkeys into the arms of waiting individuals. The point is that these guys stay in their positions. They're not trying to catch their own monkey. They are funneling monkeys toward the others. Okay. So that's a nice story. It's also involves, it's pretty cognitively complex, as you can argue. It involves coordination, involves planning, involves shared intentions. It's a pretty complicated thing. And it's the kind of hunting that we see in humans. It predicts that we'll have somehow quantifiable roles, that individuals will take up their positions before the hunt even starts. And then you see strategic sharing according to effort. So that there's no temptation for individuals to cheat and not hunt. There needs to be some kind of way for them to protect against cheaters. Okay. These are really, really hard predictions to test. And unfortunately, I don't feel like I'm in a position to properly to test these with observational data in the wild. Okay? It's really difficult to quantify these roles. They may switch back and forth. How can you keep track? As you saw in that chaotic hunt, imagine that spread out over, over a couple hundred meters. It's really hard to keep track of what everybody's doing. Okay? So really, until we have the technology, and I think we're going to be getting there soon, but until we have the technology to track each individual's movements on a really fine scale, I don't feel comfortable testing these predictions. So full disclosure there. However, until that happens, I think there's a much simpler explanation for the kind of group hunting that we see in chimps. And that is a byproduct mutualism, which is a well-known biological phenomenon, which simply states that it's a group of self-minded individuals. Each individual is acting on its own accord, selfishly, independently, but in doing so will incidentally benefit others, so that there's overall an advantage to hunting in groups. Right? So let me see how this schematic works. It's the same story, okay? But it might look more like this. One individual goes, the monkeys scatter, and then everybody else says, ooh, okay, there's a monkey fleeing. I'm going to go try to catch that one and run around and grab it, rather than being in position there before the hunt starts. You see the difference? So it's cognitively very simple. Each individual is trying to maximize their own chances of catching their own monkey. So there's immediate benefits to participating, and therefore no temptation to cheat. Hello? Uh-oh. Oh. No, I do not want a security. Okay, there we go. So, what does this predict? Well, it predicts that hunting probability should increase with party size. We've already shown that. Remember, that was the ubiquitous finding. But it also predicts that the individual probability of obtaining meat, so the probability that I myself get a piece of meat, should increase with the number of hunters who are hunting. Okay? And that's borne out by data from Gilby. So this is very simply the probability that the focal animal on a given day obtains a portion of meat as a function at a given hunt as a function of the number of hunters in the party. And it's a significant positive relationship. Same at Kanyawara as well, the site in Uganda. Very, very similar results. So there is a benefit to hunting in groups. But, okay, that's great. But we still have a problem. And that is, how do these things get started? Presumably, it's costly to be the only one hunting. The male colobus drop down from the canopy and they attack hunters. There's energetic costs to racing around in the canopy trying to catch these monkeys. And according to a byproduct mutualism, if everybody's all hunting at the same time and monkeys are going everywhere and they can't defend themselves very well, that's great. But how does it get started? Still seems to be a collective action problem. So my colleagues and I came up with what we call the impact hunter hypothesis, which hinges on individual differences in hunting tendencies. We're all different. I would never jump out of an airplane with a parachute, and I imagine there are several people in here who would. Okay. We're suggesting that the similar individual differences apply to hunting behavior, risk-taking behavior in chimpanzees, and that this can help explain how hunts get started. Very simply, imagine we're under a group of monkeys, and I'm scared. I'm not going to go hunt, but Susan is super gung-ho hunter, really skillful, and the costs are lower for her. And so she climbs up after the monkeys. They start to scatter. Maybe she gets mobbed. And then that reduces the costs for the other individuals. And therefore, they see an opportunity to hunt. Second individual hunts. Makes it easier for Susan because maybe it draws a couple of the defending monkeys over from her. More individuals are fleeing for their lives, reduces the cost for a third individual. That individual hunts, and you can see how it would end up being sort of a cascade reaction with everybody hunting. But critically, everybody hunting with their own immediate self-interests at heart. So, we have found evidence at Gilby, specifically in the Kasakela community, not in the smaller Matumba community, which is interesting, and at Kanyawara, evidence of 5 individuals over the course of these long studies that meet our criteria for impact hunters in this scenario. Okay, you can see their names all there. This is my favorite chimp ever. So, what's the characteristics of these impact males? Well, they hunted first. Okay. So if you look at the proportion of hunts when a male was the first hunter, and you look at this is the expected probability of hunting. If there was only one male there, obviously there's a 100% chance that male is going to be the first one to hunt. 50% if there are 2, 33%. Okay. And so this is data from Kanyawara, but showing that the 2 impact hunters there, Johnny and Emoso, were significantly more likely than expected, or more often than expected, did they hunt first at a given group size. So, for example, when there are 4 male hunters, you'd expect them to hunt first 25% of the time, but Emoso hunted like 65%, hunted first 65% of the time. So this was the case at Gilby also. So they tend to be the first ones to hunt. And next, I think this is the most exciting result, is that when these individuals are present in a group that encounters red colobus, a hunt is significantly more likely to occur than if they weren't there. All right. This is, again, just from one individual, Johnny at Kanyawara, but it's the same for all 5 individuals I said across the sites. At a given party size, the probability of hunting is higher if Johnny was there than if he wasn't there. Now, I should say these analyses, those lines are there just for illustration's sake. The analyses that I did was on an encounter level basis, a logistic regression. This, okay? So they're having a catalytic effect on hunting. When they're not there, their groups are less likely to hunt, which is a really exciting sort of indicates what the ramifications are of individual differences in behavior for social behavior. And then finally, we found that this individual variation may also explain inter and intra-population differences in hunting probability and hunting frequency, because when those impact males die, in the cases where we have data, overall hunting probabilities drop, as you might expect. So if we take Figgin from Gilby, who died in 1982, in the 4 years preceding his death, controlling for the number of males present at a colobus encounter, the probability of hunting was much higher than it was in the 4 years after his death. So hunting rates declined. So this could explain why at certain sites like Budongo in Uganda, they don't hunt very much. Maybe they're missing some of these keystone individuals. All right, so to go back to our question then, I'm going to argue, and then again, remember, I'll be the first one to say I haven't properly tested whether or not they actually collaborate, because I think it's a very difficult thing. But I found that we can't ignore the possibility that a very simple byproduct mutualism can explain the group hunting that we see in chimpanzees. Even in cases where we see what might look like collaboration. How can we possibly rule out the fact that they're all working independently rather than for the group? So that suggests then that what we see in humans is a real fundamental shift in hunting behavior, in what we're able to do. And so something really, really different is going on with humans than with chimpanzees. And as assuming that the last common ancestor was somewhat chimpanzee-like. I should say that I'm talking about reliance on collaboration. It could certainly happen, but is it absolutely fundamental to what chimpanzees do? No. All right, so we're now going to turn to the second part of the talk, which is sex bias in hunting. So is chimpanzee predation male biased? Well, we already have the answer, okay? If we look across various chimpanzee sites, we'll see that pretty overwhelmingly the percentage of kills made by males is much higher than the percentage of kills made by females. Okay. Okay. Does that mean the talk is over? No, because that raises what I think is a more interesting question. In fact, is why do we see this? Okay. We know females do hunt. In fact, I'm finally coming clean about this, but this is, this took me 10 years to get this photograph, and you don't understand how hard it is, how lucky I was to be in the position to get that photograph. That's a female, and I always use it in my talks about males hunting, so it feels good to come clean. So why is it? They can hunt, they do hunt. Why do they hunt so much less than males do? And can that give us a window into the sex differences we see in human hunting? So the first hypothesis that I'm going to address is, we're calling it the reduced opportunity hypothesis. Remember I said early on that at Gilby and Kanyawara, females tend to be more solitary than males. It's a well-known ecological phenomenon that smaller groups don't travel as far as larger groups because they don't overwhelm the habitat. What am I trying to say anyway? So maybe it is that females just simply don't have as many opportunities as males have to hunt. Obviously, if you travel more, you're more likely to run into prey. Okay? So maybe they just don't have the opportunities. So this has two very simple predictions. The first is that, well, they should encounter prey less often. I'm going to talk only about red colobus here because encounters of cryptic prey are really hard to record, so we're never really sure of that. So red colobus encounters are really obvious because they make a lot of noise and they blunder around in the canopy and so on. So females should be less likely to encounter red colobus than males are. And then once they are at a hunt, if a female is present at a hunt, if this is the sole reason why females hunt less than males overall, then we should expect them to have the same probability of hunting as a male. Right? Make sense? Okay, so here are the raw data from the 3 sites. I really like looking at raw data just to make sure that before we do all these models, just to make sure we know what we're looking at, we see the phenomena. And it sure looks like if you take the proportion of follows, so remember a focal follow on a given day, what's the probability that prey, or red colobus in this case, are encountered during that follow as a function of follow duration. Obviously, the longer the follow in hours, the more likely it is that you're going to encounter prey. It certainly looks as though if there's a male focal in the circles versus a female focal, the triangles, it sure looks like males are more likely to encounter colobus than females are at the 3 sites. Put this into a generalized linear mixed model with simply encounter, yes, no, as a function of the sex of the focal and the duration with the various other parameters there. You find that indeed at Kasakela and at Kanyuara, females are indeed less likely to encounter red colobus than males were. Again, lines are just for illustration here. Not the case at Mutumba, which is interesting. Okay, so that supports this hypothesis. Second prediction was that when present at a hunt, females should be equally likely to hunt as males. Okay, if it's purely the lack of opportunity that is driving this. Here we have the 3 sites again. Hunting probability of a focal individual as a function of their sex. And contrary to the prediction, we see that at all 3 sites, females here in the lighter beige are significantly less likely to hunt than males are. So they're there, but not hunting as often as males. So what this means is that the reduced opportunity hypothesis goes part of the way to explaining why females don't hunt as much. But when they are present for a hunt, they are also they are actually less likely than males to hunt, which suggests that there's something else going on. So what might that be? So Trivers taught us that female reproductive success is the variation in female reproductive success is far more impacted by nutrition than it is for males, which is impacted by the number of mates. So this suggests that females might just be more sensitive than males to the energetic costs and benefits of hunting, right? Risking failure and wasting calories on a meal when you could forage on something more reliable is more risky for females than for males. So maybe they're more selective about when they hunt. In addition, female chimps are often carrying young offspring, and so maybe jumping about in the treetops, being mobbed by monkeys is pretty dangerous to your offspring, and so they may avoid that. So this predicts that females should then, rather than arboreal monkeys, they should tend to target more sedentary, non-threatening prey, and then also females that have clinging offspring should avoid hunting red colobus. So the first hypothesis is borne out really pretty well. Here are the raw numbers and the statistics. If we look at the prey items categorized by type. So dark bars are arboreal monkeys, medium bars are baboons and baby bush pigs, which are, this is ordered in terms of decreasing risk and cost, right? So these are the most costly because they're up in the trees, they require a lot of energy to catch, and they also fight back, and they're pretty nasty, okay? Baboons and bush pigs, they're on the ground, and it's usually a pretty opportunistic grab, so it doesn't involve the pursuit, but they do fight back. Okay, for those of us who have been treed by an angry mother bush pig while their chimps trying to catch her babies, they're terrifying. Okay, but maybe not as costly as trying to catch an arboreal monkey. And then the last category, bushbuck other. These are, remember the little fuzzy stuffed animal-looking bushbuck fawn that they just find in the undergrowth. Okay, or nestlings that they get out of holes in trees, for example. They don't fight back. They're easy to catch, and they don't require any energy. So we see clearly here that when you look at prey items broken down by this type, the proportion captured by females for bushbuck and other is significantly higher than for the other types. Yeah.
What are the size differences in like an arboreal monkey or a small baboon that they may be able to grab? Significant differences in the amount of meat that they would be able to consume?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is, of course, that it varies quite a bit. Monkeys, at Gombe anyway, they tend to go after the juveniles more than the adults because they're probably easier to catch and not as scary. They're going to be pretty similar in size to a bushbuck fawn or a young baboon. So that's pretty similar. Things like nestlings and eggs and small the things that they get from holes and so on are probably quite a bit smaller and maybe less energetically rewarding. But I've argued in a couple of papers that for chimps, I don't think it's necessarily the amount of meat that's important. I think that it's just the fact that they get meat at all because of the micronutrients that are available in meat that are or more accessible in meat than in the rest of their diet. Okay, so females this supports this hypothesis. Females at Kasakela and Mutumba tend to target these sedentary, non-threatening prey. The reason there's no Kanyawara data on here, and this opens up another research question, and it's really fascinating, is that they only hunt arboreal monkeys. So across, it was 25 years of data we looked at, they ate one duiker, which they scavenged, okay? Everything else are arboreal monkeys, even though they presumably have plenty of birds' nests and eggs and duikers and so on. So that's another interesting question. Okay. So our second prediction for this hypothesis was that females with young offspring should be less likely to hunt. And this was not supported, which I found really interesting because it was, that to me, I thought that was a slam dunk. That there would, why would you put your offspring in danger up in the trees? But when I thought about it, I was like, well, I saw Gremlin, a female at Gombe, hunting red colobus with twins hanging off of her. Okay, so I think probably the answer to this question is this is maybe one of the weaknesses of long-term data. Here, this gentleman over here asked about what the definition of a hunt was. Climbing in pursuit of monkeys. Well, there are going to be different levels of intensity for that. So maybe females with babies try but give up more easily, or they're not really trying that hard. Okay, so that's a possibility. But anyway, not supported there at any of the sites. Okay, wrapping up, the last hypothesis that we looked at should be titled the male chimps or jerks hypothesis, which is that when females get a carcass, on the rare occasion when females get a carcass, most of the time some male displays through the group, hits her on the head, jumps on her back, grabs the monkey, and leaves her begging for the food for the carcass that she caught. All right. So, what's the point of hunting if you're immediately going to get it taken away from you? Okay, it seems very simple. So the basic predictions here are that as male party size increases, so in larger male groups with more males, a given female, a focal female, should be less likely to hunt as the number of males increases. And when she does get a carcass, it should be more likely to be stolen from her when there are more males around. So first prediction was borne out. This is Kasakela data, focal female hunting probability as a function of the number of adult males there. This is when she's present at a hunt that's already happening. Okay? So did she participate in a hunt? The probability that she did decreases with the number of adult males present. Whoops. Interestingly, this was not the case at Matumba or Kanyawara. So sometimes, I say all these times, it's so great to do these comparative studies, but then you're like, well, what is it? Does it really? Is that actually meaningful? Is it because Matumba is smaller? Is it because Kanyawara is in a different forest? We don't know. This is why we need more long-term studies that go on for the next 100 years. Okay, last prediction. Indeed, the more males that were present, the greater the likelihood of theft there was from a female. So in this case, it was the interaction term in this generalized linear mixed model that was significant, showing that as the number of males present increased, the probability of, or the proportion of possessions in which there was a theft went up for females, but not for males. Okay, and in the analyses, I used adult male present as a continuous variable. This is just for illustration's sake to bin it like this. But you can see females are far more likely to have it stolen from them than males are in large groups. Matumba, we are awaiting the Swahili translations of the theft data on this. And at Kanyawara, this might explain why our first result of no effect of number of males on female hunting at Kanyawara, theft is pretty rare, and the number of female possessions is really rare. Okay, so that may just explain that. I'm not going to walk through this, every bit of it. Just notice that there are X's and check marks. Take-home message is that there are ecological, so reduced opportunity and risk sensitivity. There are ecological constraints on female hunting. Okay, it varies from site to site, but for the most part, it's borne out. And then there are also social constraints with the number of males around. Right, and the fact that males steal carcasses from females, to explain why females don't hunt as often as males do. So I'm suggesting that we've got these biological and, I should have social on there, social constraints on females. If we're, again, assuming that the last common ancestor faced similar constraints, I would conclude that the LCA also had male-biased hunting. So what this does, I think, is provide an inherent biological basis for the sexual division of labor. Remember, we've got, in hunter-gatherers, females do hunt, but tends to be more sedentary and low-risk prey items, like as in chimpanzees. So I think that it just provided this important biological basis for this cultural sexual division of labor that evolves over hominin evolution. And so, in addition, the reliance on complex collaboration that we see in modern humans is also unique to our lineage. So now we turn it over to the paleoanthropologists and so on to try to really understand why what the ecological forces were to and social forces were to explain the evolution of these traits in humans. Very quickly, need to thank a million people. This is a very small number of our research team at Gilby, ditto at Kanyawara. The field assistants at these sites are absolutely amazing, and I always feel somewhat disingenuous being the one up here telling people about chimps, because they really know far more than we ever will. And they're extraordinarily dedicated and take really, really great data. And all our funding agencies, and of course also to Jane Goodall for inspiring us all and letting us work at Gilby, and Ann Pusey for helping co-direct the database. So thank you, and I think we've got plenty of time for questions.
I have two questions, but I'll ask one and then wait a turn for the other.
Okay.
What about body mass? Does body mass of the animal predict the likelihood of hunting, and is that, do you control for that in looking at male-female differences?
That is a terrific question, because females are smaller than males. Then you would expect then well, okay, there's two ways to think about it. You could say, well, maybe you'd expect females to hunt more because they're smaller, and up in the thin branches they're less likely to, come to a sticky end. But it's also a matter of if you're fighting against prey, bigger body mass might be more important.
Keep the meat that you get.
And keeping the meat that you can get, yeah. So I think that's certainly a strong possibility. Testing it, we are now, so we have weights from the early 70s through 2000, at Gilby they had a weight on a spring balance with a scale on it, and they put a banana in a bucket, and the chimp would climb up the weight. So we have some weight data up until then, and then now just this past summer we started doing laser photogrammetry, where we have a parallel laser mounted on a camera where we're able to estimate or measure relative body size. So I think we could get at it with that. So it'll be interesting to see whether small males are less likely to hunt than large males and so on. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Okay, so first off, thank you. It's super interesting. My question has a number of moving parts, so I'll try to not ask too many things. But so I know you had said earlier that chimps have a fishing fusion society, but so my first question is, the first part is, are they preferentially heading out with certain other individuals, or is it basically entirely stochastic? And the corollary to that is, if they are sort of preferentially heading out with some individuals as opposed to others, then are you seeing sort of downstream fitness consequences for those that are preferentially going out with the impact hunters as opposed to those that are not?
Okay, so when you say heading out with, you mean on hunts, or do you mean preferentially associating with?
Associating with.
So yes, there's, and this gets at the core of actually what my grad student is starting to look at is males do have preferences with whom they hang out with, and with whom they groom, and there's quite a bit of evidence, not so much from Gilby, and we can talk about that also, but at other sites there seems to be some sort of reciprocal nature in these, some balance in these relationships. So it applies to grooming, association, meat sharing sometimes, although my work doesn't support that. What the fitness consequences are, that is a huge question, and we are in the process of looking at that. Because part of the problem is because these guys live for 50 years. And they don't reproduce very often, and so trying to understand the fitness consequences of social bonds and also how those social bonds develop is an open area. And
just one last piece to that.
Okay.
Is it the case that impact hunters are sort of preferentially associating with other impact hunters, or is it?
So, in the interest of time, glossing over this a little bit, the impact hunters at Gilby were all sort of on their own. They existed in time. There was only one in this time frame, one in this time frame. At Kanyawara, the two of them they lived during the same period of time. So the question is, do others preferentially associate with them, or?
Well, I was just wondering if those who are sort of more likely to engage in hunting are preferentially associating with others who are likely to engage.
We haven't looked at that. My gut feeling is that there are so many other factors. So remember, hunting is is relatively rare. So like a Gombe, we see one like 30 times a year. And there's not really any indication there that there's any, that they're planning ahead in any sense. There's no, so at a couple of other sites, there are reports of hunting patrols where they seem to be searching specifically for monkeys. We don't see anything that looks like that. It really looks like it's sort of opportunistic. I'm going to go from this fig tree to that fig tree. Oh, there's a monkey troop in between. Let's hunt. So I would be surprised if individuals are making association preferences based on the probability of a hunt occurring. Yeah. Yeah.
So fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Sure.
I presume that this was just in the sort of discursive nature of the presentation and the length of time that you were using shorthand. But in discussing the impact hunting hypothesis, you said that the explanation would be that the costs are lower for impact hunters relative to others.
That's one possibility.
Yeah, so that's one possibility. What really matters is not the cost, it's the ratio between costs and benefits, right?
Sure.
And differences in that ratio can come from a variety of sources. One could be, as in the female case, that some individuals are less likely to have their prey appropriated, or at least the cost of deterring the potential theft
Yep.
is lower for them.
So bigger or higher ranking
Right,
or
bigger
something
higher
like that.
ranking, more allies, whatever it is, right? Another could be, and I think this is worth entertaining as well, that there are not differences, and I'm putting this forth from the human perspective, because so much of animal behavioral ecology looks at more readily quantified issues, understandably.
Yeah.
But the animal literature is starting to move in this direction, and that's that there are personality differences, right? So the objective cost-benefit ratio may not differ between impact hunters and non-impact hunters.
Absolutely.
You could weigh body mass. You could take social rank into account, and there's still a lot of unexplained variance.
For sure.
I would be surprised if say, rank doesn't explain some of that. But so
Absolutely.
it may be that impact hunters have very similar cost-benefit ratios to non-impact hunters, but they're more risk-prone.
Yep.
That is,
So that was the purpose of my comment about jumping out of airplanes.
Exactly.
Is that, and naively when I was on the job market, I was naively saying things like, oh, let's see if we can find doing GWAS analyses of getting do these guys have a particular genetic makeup that other ones don't? And I mean now it's with a sample size we're not going to be able to do that. But I really think that's critically important.
and I didn't see Lynn Fairbanks come in, so I'm not sure if she did. Oh, there you are. So, sort of drawing on Lynn's work, it's not impossible to have behavioral indices of personality differences, and including in free-ranging animals, like
Sure.
distance jumped between trees,
Yep.
and things
Yeah.
like that.
So the one thing that we've done that's a little bit, so we've got two comments. One is that I have a paper looking at whether or not, so I found that there are also impact patrollers as well. So when a group is at the edge of the range, again, so for those of you who don't know, chimps are horrible creatures again, and when they're at the edge of their range, they will go on patrol where they are intentionally trying to pick off lone members of a neighboring community. And by pick off, I mean kill them. And I found that there are certain individuals, when they're present in a group at the edge, they were more likely to go on patrol than if those guys weren't there. Okay. What was interesting to me, disappointing at first because I was like, nature paper, but I thought they'd be the same individuals. I thought the same impact males in that context would be the same patrollers, and it's not the case. In hindsight, I think, well, that actually makes sense because this is foraging and that's aggression. And they're actually sort of potentially psychologically different mechanisms. We just think they look the same because the prey are monkeys and it looks awful. We've looked at that a little bit, and I think I agree. Jumping from trees and rates of aggression, all those kinds of things, I think we can certainly measure. We also have a colleague, Alex Weiss, who has applied the personality literature, or personality tests given to humans and captive animals to the field assistants at Gilby, sort of rating them on boldness and so on. I'm more data driven, so I would prefer to take your first approach, but so it's certainly not. I agree. It's not just about the costs and benefits. Yeah. Lynn.
You talked about the males stealing the prey items from the female hunters, but that contrasts with the old story about males giving females meat in exchange for sex. Is that gone?
There's now one person who believes that. Well, two and a half people who believe that now. It's been, that is a great example of how you take a sexy idea, forgive me, and it's really appealing. And when you look back at the study, there's one study at Gilby that showed that hunts were more likely to occur if there was a sexually receptive female in the group. Well, I actually found, using more data and the correct statistical test, that they're actually less likely to hunt when there's swollen females available. And I argue that was because, they have to choose, right? And you can't hunt and guard a female, okay? So there's very few. There's no data indicating. Certainly in East Africa, no data indicating that males preferentially share with swollen females. That those who share with swollen females are more likely to mate. There's a couple studies, one study in captivity that shows there's no connection with paternity as well. There is one study from West Africa, Thai National Forest again, where they found a correlation between if a male shared with a female once in a 22-month period, he was more likely to sire her offspring than if he hadn't shared with her. But what was interesting was that there was no correlation in the short term. So again, no preferential sharing with swollen females or individual mating advantage. So it's kind of a weird result. So, no.
Okay.
Yeah, Erica.
So, given what you just said about males having to choose, in regards to the sex or meat, that implies that the swollen females are not participating in the hunt. So are they less likely to participate, or because they're in consortships, are they discouraged from?
That's a great question, and I should have looked at that and haven't. Swollen females are likely to be in these big groups because that's one of the reasons why these bigger groups form. I think unfortunately the life of a swollen female is really awful, and my gut feeling is that while doesn't have any offspring, she's going to be more concerned about being beaten up and than she is about getting meat. But I really need to look at that. Yeah. Yeah.
On a similar note, males who are more likely to catch a prey, do they tend to mate more often? So the ones that are more successful at hunts, do they tend to?
Yeah. So that's great. Is there a sort of a fitness advantage to hunting? Well, you certainly would think so, given how excited they are about meat and how nutritionally important it would seem to be. We don't know. The problem is, and this gets back to issues with confounding variables. So at least at Kanyawara so one of the impact males at Kanyawara and two of the impact males at Gilby were alpha male at least at some point during their lives. Okay, so there's a very strong correlation between rank and offspring and paternity in chimps. So it's kind of hard to tease those things apart. My gut feeling would be yes, there would be, but I think it's the kind of thing that we need another 65 years of data to really look at. Unfortunately, kind of a cop-out, but Brooke?
I'm just wondering if you could actually look at that, if you could do sort of an event history analysis, if you knew sort of at what point they became an impact hunter, if that preceded them sort of having the right to become alpha males versus them being alpha males and then becoming.
So one interesting thing, so again, interest of time, one of these guys, Apollo, was not an impact male early and then became an impact male. Everybody else, as far as we know, for the ones that we have basically full life histories for, were impact hunters regardless of their age and rank. So Frodo, I wish we could look at the paper, but he is off the charts in terms of both his hunting propensity and his skill level, or his success rate, I should say, from an adolescent all the way till his death. Whereas others it changed a bit. So it's hard to test.
And he became an alpha male.
And he was alpha in there, but was an impact hunter on both sides. So yeah.
So in the similar vein, so one reason males might get more is because they get the social advantage of hunting, but with females that advantage doesn't help them as much. So with males, if you're a good hunter, you're more likely to get mates. With females, it doesn't matter if you're a good hunter, you're going to get mates regardless. Could that be a possibility?
Well, that's assuming that females get meat regardless. So then we get into an equally complicated realm of why do they share with each other and what factors influence sharing. I tend to, this is based simply on basically my observations at one site, so I'm acknowledging that there's variation, but certainly at Gilby, I think that the political sharing story is, at least among males, has been exaggerated. I think it's very tempting to say that males share with their allies and so on in order, in response to or to encourage coalitionary support later on, or grooming or something like that. My field work demonstrated that there was no correlation between certainly grooming and nearest neighbor frequency and that kind of stuff and sharing among males. So I would say it's a much more parsimonious explanation to think about it in terms of calories and micronutrients rather than social capital. But it's certainly it's a possibility for sure.
Yeah. So there's a sharing aspect of social capital, but then there's also just showing look, I have really good genes. Look how I'm an amazing hunter. You should mate with me.
Yeah.
It's beneficial for males and for females. They're going to get a mate regardless if they're a good hunter.
Yeah. Again, yes, but how do we? This is where I wish I studied social insects, where I could actually have a sample size to actually test these things. So I think there's so many confounding variables that we have to think about that just at this stage of the game, it's kind of impossible. I wish it wasn't, but yeah. I was talking to Jonathan Pruitt, who studies personality in spiders, and he's found, yes, there are personality differences, and that there's, you can explain it by looking at their genes. And that there really, there are ones that are bolder and risk takers and ones that aren't, but he could do it because he studies spiders. So, yeah.
So I'm wondering, looking at sort of the sensitivity to risk argument, which is appealing to me, but how many hunts you either have video footage of where you could look at this, or whether there's this level of detail in the focal follow? Like I'm thinking about what somebody mentioned earlier, maybe you or maybe somebody else, about whether the females, when they have the infants on them, are participating, because maybe that enables them to have some share, or the greater likelihood of having a share of the meat, but they're participating in a
Sort of half-hearted
less
kind of way,
risky
yeah.
way, yeah. So like if there are measures about, how high up they go in the tree or how many leaps they take or something like
I
that.
wish, but yeah, that's spoken like someone who's never seen a chimpanzee hunt, because it really is chaos.
Yeah. And you don't have them on video where you could slow down the video and look at like how.
Well, I
many
mean, there is,
are on
those a couple minutes of hunting clips there are the best I have from, several years of field work. It's hard. It's hard. And that's why I'm still on the microphone, I'll stop. Well, when I was criticizing the collaboration stuff, I mentioned how hard it is to even keep track of one individual's movements, let alone a whole group. And so I'm so jealous of people like Meg Crowfoot who have, fine GPS collars on all the animals in a group, and you can tell exactly what. Unfortunately, and then we can get into a discussion about ethics and so on here. For some reason, and I agree, I wouldn't like to see collars on chimps. Right now, the technology is that it's collars. I don't know why I feel that way. I don't know why I'm okay with collars on baboons and capuchins. Who knows, right? And we're just simply also not allowed to at this point. So I'm dreaming of a day when we can remotely shoot something into a chimp's rump from afar, and that will then tell us, exactly how much they're moving and where they are and all that kind of stuff. Because that would revolutionize everything. Because we still, the fission fusion question, we still don't know what, we find them based on calls and feeding trees, but a lot of the time we just don't know what everybody else is doing, and it would be fascinating.
Do you have injury data?
Injury data?
Yeah. So you would know the actual risk of participating in these hunts and whether.
Well, we don't know whether they got. We have injury data in the sense that an individual will be seen with an injury, but whether it came from.
But you don't during that when they're doing the follows during the hunt, they don't record whether they saw a chimp fall, like when a fall or something.
They will record it if they saw it,
Yeah.
but whether or not they,
But if that's the consideration, then by definition it should be, right, if the animals are good at calculating cost-benefit ratio, then they should rarely make a mistake where that occurs, right? So even that you could have complete fidelity in the data and still not be testing the hypothesis, because those events should be rare.
yeah.
I have two questions. So one with the cryptic prey, I know you can't really get opportunity data out of it because they're cryptic and you don't actually know what the distribution
Right.
is. But I was wondering if you just had any thoughts based on just observation of behavioral differences as to why the females are getting more than 60% of the cryptic prey. I was also wondering, can I just ask my second question?
Sure. I'll
So-
probably forget the first one, but anyway, go ahead.
Cryptic prey, more females
Okay.
than males. And then the other one is whether you see, I forget what your name for the initiating males was.
Impact hunters, yeah.
Impact hunters. So are there also males on the other end of the spectrum who only join after they're 3 or 4? Do they have a statistically can you look at basically the other end of that distribution where they'll only join when you did the really nice
Yeah.
B participates and then increases
Yeah.
the C, are there C males?
We come back to the problem of, I was even slightly uncomfortable with the analysis of who hunts first. It's so hard. It's really hard to tell what's going on. I think my impression is that, yes, that's probably the case, that there are certain individuals who are at the other end of the spectrum. But to quantify it would be really, really, really hard. I know I keep copping out on all these. These are all questions that we've had, but it's so hard. It really is hard. Yeah?
Can you
Oh,
my female.
oh,
Like-
right. See, I told you, I'd forget. One mechanism, I think, is that a lot of these females are often in smaller parties than males, right? And and large parties are loud. And so I think a lot of these, like bush buck fawns, can hear the party coming and will take off, whereas it's more likely to be surprised by a female and her dependent offspring. That's one possibility. That doesn't explain why. I mean, if it's a matter of finding a nest of fledglings in a hole in a tree, that you shouldn't expect a sex difference unless it's just that males are they're more ADD and they're just less attentive to, they're just going to get fruit, or they're worried about females and they're not looking closely at what's around them. I don't know. It's a tough one. Yeah.
So I raised this conjecture with hesitation because I suspect
Perfect.
it's pretty ridiculous.
Is my answer going to be we don't know and we can't do
No,
it?
but
Okay.
you could test this given what you said earlier. And
All right, good.
I'm comfortable saying that this is probably a stupid idea because I'm the author who published it. So I can say that on camera to myself. If you're going to look at whether estrus females hunt or not, or what the frequency is,
Mhm.
then at least one possibility is it's not estrus per se, both because of time allocation issues and they're being monopolized by aggressive males, but rather it is the period of pregnancy after estrus, because there is reproductive immunomodulation in which the costs of exposure to meat-borne pathogens change for females where that doesn't occur for males. And again, highly speculative, but consistent with this pattern, if you look at gestational aversions in humans, you see that meat is the principal target of those aversions.
Yep.
That occurs primarily in the first trimester. And similarly, if you look at the taboos that cultures apply to pregnancy, meat is the principal target of those.
Interesting.
Now, before you make too much of that, Carlos, who happens to be visiting us, and I have also shown that meat is the principal target of all taboos, period. So
Okay.
there's something special about meat in terms of its
Interesting.
symbolic and emotional significance.
Well, I'm going to make this even more complicated by saying that we have a paper, I think Rob O'Malley, who did his PhD at Gilby looking at insectivory, we published a paper recently looking at meat consumption by females and found that females in the early pregnancy were more likely to get meat than than other females.
I saw it when I published that paper. And
because we argued that they really need these particular, I mean, we don't know what they are, but vaguely need these micronutrients and so on. We also don't know whether they get that more meat from begging harder or from hunting more or what, but it doesn't fit in with your story.
In that highly speculative paper, I suggested that primates are most likely to prey on social insects because of their density, and that social insects have hygiene behaviors which reduce the pathogen costs.
Oh, all right, yeah.
Whereas if you're hunting mammals, it's the weak and the sick that are your principal prey.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting idea, but
Probably wrong.
no, not necessarily. It's a tough one. Yeah.
One of the big differences between these chimp hunters, by your account, and human hunters, I mean, there are two differences. One is, of course, as your pictures illustrate, the humans are using tools, and aside from, extracting invertebrates and so forth, I mean, so one part of the question is, do chimps ever use any tools for hunting large animals? And second is the intentionality of it. I mean, human hunters may go out foraging, they have some weapons along, and then they shoot an animal that they see, but they very often, you know, the main purpose of going in this direction at this time where these people are by yourself is to hunt.
Right.
And that, by your account, is just not happening.
Very different, right.
As far as you can see, you're not seeing an animal heading out, even though you can see animals, you can see chimps on the border going out to patrol and potentially kill other chimps. You don't see what look like intentional hunts forming.
Right.
Is that right? So what,
Yes.
I mean, how do you, what, just speculatively, how do you get from casual hunting to purposeful hunting, where that, and from hunting without tools to hunting with tools?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, God, that's a tough one. I think no matter what, it's going to be a gradual thing, but it's obviously made possible in humans by the sexual division of labor, right? I mean, you can't. Chimps cannot afford the time to be exclusively searching for prey, because they have caloric requirements that they need to meet, and if they fail in the hunt, then it's serious consequences. Whereas, in hunter-gatherers, males can hunt because there are other members of the group who are searching for tubers and vegetables and so on, which will then they all share as a group. So, I mean, and that's a huge fundamental difference. So how that came about, I mean, I argue that maybe the reason why it's males versus females in the roles that we see might be because of constraints early on that females faced, but exactly how it ends up being, with these norms, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I think there's going to be they will have slowly started getting more and more meat. I think it comes along with becoming more and more intelligent as well, right? So they maybe started to get more meat because the climate was changing, and then that triggered a change in their cognitive abilities, which then enabled it. So I don't know, it's hard to say.
And so one step maybe which you implied but then just quickly went by is where does shearing plant food begin? Because shearing plant food could be part of what enables hunting.
Sure.
So if you knew that you were going to pool plant food with some other individual, then that makes hunting possible. And if you don't, if that isn't going to happen, which it doesn't. I mean, it really essentially doesn't happen in adult chimps.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's another thing
Yeah.
to explain is when do you start sharing plant food?
Right. And I think, again, these things it's really difficult to pinpoint any of these. And I think it's all sort of everything's probably all happened together slowly over time. To answer your question about hunting with tools, there is one site in West Africa where they use sticks to spear, well, they say spear, that was what the press got a hold of, but to injure bush babies in holes in trees. But it's not altogether different. I don't think that's too different, too much, not far removed from using tools to get insects, right? This is not throwing spears at large prey. So large prey, so this is one of the big differences another big difference between chimps and humans. And even though most of what humans capture are sort of animals that are less than 10 kilograms and so on, we are obviously capable of capturing much, much larger prey, whereas chimps really don't. I mean, there's one observation of them with a half-grown bush pig, which was like 40 kilos or something like that, which was unbelievable. But other than that, you guys are starting to look glassy-eyed. But everybody's awake, so that's good, yeah?
I was just wondering, just based on that, if they come across animals that are in snares, will they take them down?
I would think, yeah, it doesn't,
Like, have you ever seen
I've never seen it. So happily, even though Gombe is basically an island now, so all my field work has been at Gombe, so Kanyawara, they have a snare problem, but I've only spent a couple of months there and never saw an animal in a snare. I've never seen them have that opportunity. My guess is that they would take it. They would take the prey. I had a follow-up. It's gone. Sorry. What were you
No, I was
suggesting?
just wondering in terms of, getting large prey.
Oh.
If
I know where I
there's-
was going.
If there's like a full-grown bush pig and it's, human snared, if it's restrained, will they attempt to take down larger prey?
Right. Yeah, that's a great.
Activity arises?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we know, obviously, they're obviously capable of killing each other. So, killing a full-grown male chimp is it's quite a task. So, in theory, they could do it with something, a large prey item that's fighting back, and maybe in a snare. What I was going to say, I remember now, was that there's a question of scavenging and piracy as well. Chimpanzees do, at least at Gombe anyway, they appropriate bushbuck carcasses from baboons quite frequently. So it's something they haven't killed themselves, but and it's and I've suggested in a couple places that might be kind of the origin of the power scavenging idea that we see, or that's prominent for theories of human evolution. That maybe one way to get more meat is, even though they tend to avoid really dead stuff, they do scavenge as well, but not very often. But the way to get fresh meat is by chasing predators off of carcasses, and so they do that. It might be another possibility. All right, thanks guys.